Haven't done a multi-review in a while, and June is going to be full of stuff to talk about, so might as well get ahead of the curve. So the first album, and the one you're probably here for, is the latest album from Carrie Underwood, Denim and Rhinestones. So it's no secret I'm not a fan of Miss Underwood's normal output. I loved My Savior, and I'd still praise it as much as I did, because as a whole, it felt like Carrie was going back to basics and what made her music so special in the first place. The gentleness of her voice, the acoustic blending, and tie-ins to Face that were super compelling. But with this album, it's more or less like she's going back to formula. The standard pop diva schlock she's been known for doing the past 10 years or so. I have never liked any of these albums and never will. And while they did have some likable elements, they couldn't save a sinking ship of mediocrity. Carrie over the course of the latter half of her career is somehow the artist with the least impact on country despite being one of the biggest names in the genre, which is solely based on her impressive original work. In a year with albums like Raised, Palomino, High, Run Rose Run, even super non-country albums like Humble Quest, Carrie just doesn't stand out in any way because she's stuck in the same place she's always been. And under normal circumstances, I would genuinely hate this album, but instead, I'm more so confused by it. Solely because this album has no idea what direction it wants to go in. There's some weird attempts at retro's 80s pop, but you know, not good in any way. I'm not expecting Carrie to have as big of a budget as The Weeknd, but I do expect a proper sense of the times, because somehow the music feels more dated than the music that actually came out in the 80s. The self-titled track, Wanted Woman, and Faster are juxtaposed with the same over-the-top diva pop Carrie's been doing since Blown Away. I have a very unpopular opinion when it comes to Carrie's success. Instead of making the same pop junk you've been making for the past 10 years, which has been selling less and less as years go on, why not actually go back to your roots and reconnect with the traits that made your original music so good and popular? Any of these standard Carrie tracks just follow the same formula. Mid-tempo, straight ace notes, horribly mixed percussion, with the same amount of vocal intensity done throughout all of it. We've seen so much of belting Carrie, like who even gives a shit at this point? The difference with someone like Morgan Wallen or Chris Stapleton is that they don't just have one shade of vocal performance done throughout all their music. There's layers to it. They're calm and collected, they're warm and gentle, and yet still have room to be brash and intense. Carrie may have impressive pipes, but it's put through such a one-dimensional lens that robs it of any actual impact. Lyrically, it's about as generic as you'd expect. Faster is just, oh, you make my heart rate increase, but I won't go into that because that's not actually what happens and I'm making all this shit up. I'm not asking you to open yourself up completely because privacy is something I believe all should have, but when music is this vague and flavorless, it makes none of it worthwhile. Take one of my favorite lines from Willie Nelson's new album. My heart was a dancer. No, you don't need to know her name. She could turn right on a nickel and give you back 4 cents and change. It's simple, descriptive, and witty. Even acknowledges that privacy bit I was talking about. And with lines like this, it's like who gives a shit? It could mean anything and not in the interesting way. Wanted Woman honestly deserves a medal for the most generic romantic song this year. It feels like I'm reading cheap Valentine's Day card gags. It's just so tasteless like the candy you get with it. However, this isn't all a plastic wasteland. The last 2 tracks are a bit worthwhile. She Don't Know is a pretty witty song on adultery, and it's dark and it's mysterious, which really meshes well with Carrie's performance. Carrie's sinister songs I've always felt had a bit more grip to them in comparison to everything else she does, so I'm glad it really worked out here. Garden is decent. Lyrically, it's arguably the best song on here in how she compares her decisions to a growing garden, which I actually found really interesting. It's brought down by the standard pop influences and it isn't allowed to grow into an overall good song, but I do like its concept. As a whole, I don't know, man. It's tonally and instrumentally confusing, going for sounds other artists have done way better, and yet also it's just a retread on everything that makes Carrie Underwood arguably the most forgettable female country star in the world today. It's hilarious how a decade ago Miranda and Carrie were the faces of women in country, and 10 years later, everyone is still talking about how forward-thinking and inventive and powerful Miranda Lambert is. And this album will be forgotten, and if Carrie doesn't recognize that problem soon, so will she. Rating wise, I'm feeling a light 4 out of 10 on Denim and Rhinestones. Now with all the negativity out of the way, let's move on to the great album. I haven't really talked about them that much, but I'm a certified American Aquarium stan. They're one of the best country bands out there, and BJ Barham is easily one of the greatest songwriters country has ever seen. And they're also the best when it comes to real world commentary like politics and economics and music. And given how loud and insufferable most country music is in that aspect, it gives them an added edge. I'll admit, Chickamaucomico is one of their lesser albums. It feels less realized and focused on its concepts and themes, and more so on these smaller vignettes of songs with loose loosely tied connections. If anything, it feels like an album capturing the transition out of the weird period the world has been in the past 2 years, really highlighting the amount of tension there's been in society, from the larger scale of the world down to the personal relationships. And the opening track especially highlights that personal aspect really well, in trying to escape the world and problems in a safe place you trust and looking for joy. Little Things legit sounds like a Pixar song, even message-wise. It's a little wacky, with a little bit of a depressing subtext below all of the optimistic energy. Just close enough is the band operating in full form. I swear, when I heard the song for the first time, I got so invested in what BJ was singing, I completely forgot I was listening to music, and it felt like I was just listening to life. It's one of BJ's greatest strengths as a songwriter, his way of going after the real, not glorified over-the-top mainstream cookie-cutter bullcrap, putting real life and human experiences into music. It's not just what makes BJ stand out among the mainstream, but among other conscious indie artists in the field today. Built to Last ties into that aspect of romanticism I was talking about with the Carrie album. BJ compares love to an old car. It clearly isn't perfect, it's flawed and has issues, but it's built to last, to endure. Less of this vague, hollow bullshit, and more so looking for the flaws yet true beauty in love. Wildfire is a bit of an awkwardly placed experimental track. Sonically, I think it goes over really well, but I gotta admit, it just doesn't fit with the rest of the record's direction. Storytelling, it's amazing as usual, and kinda reminds me of Ring of Fire's story a little bit. Things we lost along the way is a bit of a bleak look into death, and how when we're on death's doorstep, it's the time we most reflect on guilt, bad choices, fallen friendships, and relationships. Short, but nonetheless very potent. Waking Up the Echoes is possibly the most depressing song I've heard for country all year. I don't want to go too much into it, but it's a song about suicide, and I just want to leave it at that. But I do think it really hits a lot of smaller messages beyond just the one and allows for a lot to think about by the end. The hardest thing, while it would have made for a poignant, powerful ending, I am glad they decided to end the record with the optimistic All I Needed, showing a bit of optimism in how bleak of a journey this album was and how the world was for the past 2 years. A light at the end of the tunnel type of song. Performance-wise, I've always liked BJ's deep and raspy vocals, and the furthering of a country sound is greatly appreciated, especially after their 90s tribute records. Lyrically, it's not his best, but it is his most emotionally stable. Compared to the intense moments on Sings Change and Wolves, I really enjoyed myself, and I think it makes for a fine addition to this incredible band's repertoire. Rating wise, I'm feeling a decent 8 out of 10 on Chickamauga. And now for the masterpiece, baby! Nico Moon's Coastin' EP. 10 out of 10. It's flawless. Nico delivers the greatest album in ages with the perfectly crafted hip-hop fusion and country tracks. I didn't even listen to the whole thing. I just heard the first 10 seconds and decided that's all I needed to hear from this godlike figure. Truly one of the albums of all time. His album sales will be in the more billions. All hail Nico Moon, my true lord and savior.